Southeast Asia, late 1960s. As the United States fights a controversial war in Vietnam, few Americans are aware that right next door in Laos, armed American servicemen are secretly conducting another war. The largest CIA covert operation in history.
The orders that I had was report to Mr. Black. It was a secret assignment.
Everybody's in civilian clothing. Nobody has a real name.
U.S. Air Force pilots are operating undercover, deciding where and when American bombs will drop on targets in Laos.
Blow up their supplies if you can find them. Kill their troops if you can find them.
It's like combat to the 10th power for sure.
They are known by their radio call sign, Raven.
Being a Raven was the greatest combat job that exists in the world.
You lived intensely, and it was dangerous.
It didn't take long for you to learn that this was a different war.
For 8 years, the Ravens fought in secret to stop communism. They did as their government asked, until they were told to pack their bags and go home, and forget about the whole thing. But the Ravens haven't forgotten. This is their story.
Spot that I went down right there.
35 years ago, these men were plainclothes warriors in a conflict that America wanted to keep undercover. These 4 Ravens are returning to Laos, a country still cloaked in layers of secrecy that they must now strip away. Larry Sanborn, Sandy, a senior Raven during his time in Laos. Mike Cavanaugh, Raven 48, spent 5 years in Southeast Asian combat zones where he learned to speak the Lao language. Ron Reinhardt, Papa Fox, Ohio farm boy who always wanted to be a soldier. He identified with the Laotian villagers who took up arms against the communists. Fred Platt, Magnet Ass, shot down 10 times. On his last flight, he was paralyzed and told he would never walk again. In the 1950s, a communist faction known as the Pathet Lao began trying to take over Laos. They were backed by North Vietnamese troops, who in turn were backed by the Chinese and Soviets. Americans who believed in the domino theory feared that if communists won in Laos, other countries in Southeast Asia would also topple.
If Laos fell, Cambodia would go, Thailand would go, and God knows what would go next. The Eisenhower administration thought that Laos was the key in Southeast Asia.
At Geneva in 1962, an accord was signed guaranteeing the neutrality of Laos. But the North Vietnamese broke the treaty before the ink was dry by leaving their troops in place. The United States felt a need to respond, but it would have to be done covertly. An assignment handed to the CIA.
We wanted to be able to say to the American people and to the United Nations that we did not have United States military personnel in the country.
The CIA would run the war, but they would need a proxy army of foot soldiers to fight it. CIA operative Bill Lair found them, a Laotian mountain tribe called the Hmong. A tiny minority in Laos, the Hmong had a history of fighting the North Vietnamese.
I knew the Hmong from Thailand. They were a fiercely independent people. They didn't want a central government to bother them. They hated the communists because the communists tried to organize everything into their system.
All they wanted from the very start, Bill will tell you, all they wanted was a plot of ground. They wanted everybody to leave them alone. And they fought and died for that.
Bill Lair gave the Hmong American weapons and lessons in modern warfare. To these Hmong tribesmen, siding with the Americans seemed like a safe bet.
In 1962, the idea of the United States losing against North Vietnam seemed incredible for just about everybody.
But the communists proved more tenacious than anyone predicted. North Vietnam saw the strategic importance of Laos. They ran a supply network, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, through Laotian territory into South Vietnam. As part of an expanding effort to defend South Vietnam, the CIA began using Hmong guerrillas to harass these supply lines. But the Hmong were badly outnumbered. So in 1967, the U.S. decided to provide the Hmong with air support. That's when the Ravens were sent in, to live and fight with the Hmong. In the 35 years since the Ravens first arrived in Laos, much has changed. Their war was lost. Laos and Vietnam are communist today.
That's the last time I saw a truck like that. Trying to get rid of it.
The Ravens have changed too. They were young warriors then. Now, well into middle age, they have returned to Laos to make peace with their own pasts.
I feel like I'm home. You know, it's like returning home after a long, long absence.
The Ravens will have a guide and translator, Susath Patrazi, a retired colonel in the Communist Army that took over after the Ravens left, which makes it surprising when he shows up wearing a Ravens t-shirt to greet the men who once bombed his country. Susath himself will be watched by communist chaperones, minders, assigned to monitor where the Ravens go and who they talk to. Officially, the Ravens are now tourists, and the video crew is shooting home movies. Everyone knows it's a lie, but the Ravens have had plenty of experience living a lie.
As far as American manpower in Laos is concerned, there are none there at the present time on a combat basis.
Most Ravens first heard of Laos through rumors in the bars and barracks of Vietnam, tales of another conflict, a less restrictive clandestine war.
They let the word leak out that there was this secret program and that it was volunteer only, and if you were really looking for where the real war was, then this was the place to go.
The program attracted a special breed. True believers convinced that stopping communism was a noble cause, worth fighting for with everything they had.
I got a little dissatisfied in Vietnam. Didn't have the appearance of a group of people that were actively out to win the war.
And so I asked if there's any way to get out of this chicken shit outfit, you know?
I was struggling against my own command structure the entire time I was in Vietnam. They did not want you to take bullet holes. They didn't want you to do your job. They just wanted you to fill a square and go home. I couldn't tolerate that attitude. I came to fight a war and aggressively fight it.
Volunteers for the Raven program may have wanted more action than Vietnam offered, but when they got to Laos, they got more than they could have imagined. These four men still call themselves Ravens, because Raven was their radio call sign during the most intense time of their lives, when they were young pilots flying these skies 3 decades ago. Laotians today may not be familiar with the name Ravens, but the words bomb and pilot are nearly synonymous in this country's collective memory. The tour guide Susath warns the Ravens not to reveal their identity to strangers.
To speak English, they might ask you, who are you? What you are doing, or what do you used to do? And you say, oh, teacher. Then they feel better because you can teach them some English.
So we don't want to relate at all that we were pilots or military or anything like
exactly.
The Ravens know that many Laotians will not be glad to see them, but they have personal reasons for making the journey.
After my last crash, I fractured my back. I spent 5 years in rehab, learning how to walk again. I want to go back because I think I left something there, unfinished.
I feel a lot of pain for having eliminated a lot of the population. In Laos, we've been told that 1/3 the population, 1 million out of the 3 million people that were there in the 60s, got killed as a result of that war. So I've done this in Vietnam, and I've gone to all the places that I spent in Vietnam, and the war is over in my head. And this is one little piece of war that's left, and I want to put it to bed also.
The Ravens want to visit with the Hmong in Laos today to see how their former allies have fared in the now communist country.
The purpose of this trip for me is to meet again with the Hmong, to rebond with them. We ate with them, we used their markets, we were with their children. You bonded with these people.
When a Raven first arrived in Laos, he knew nothing about the Hmong or about his assignment.
The whole program was so classified that any kind of formal discussion was severely discouraged, so I had zero knowledge about where it was.
Here is a colonel standing at attention saluting us as we get out of the airplane. The thought that went through my head was, now I know what the kamikaze pilots felt like, because here's all these people coming out to salute us because they think that we're volunteering for a suicide mission.
Every new Raven, in fact all military personnel in Laos, went through a process known as sheep dipping. Brigadier General Heine Aderholt, in charge of Air Force Special Ops in Southeast Asia, was on loan to the CIA.
Well, you sheep dip someone, you hide their identity. That's so if they go over there and get shot down, Uncle Sam can say, he didn't belong to me, and say, go hang the man, you know.
To be sheep dipped means to give up your identity, rank, dog tags, uniform, to temporarily resign from the Air Force.
This gentleman asked who I was, and I said, yes, I'm Lieutenant Deering, and I was in uniform at that time. He says, well, go into the men's room and change. He says, you will never wear a uniform again from now until you finally go home and you're actually back in the United States for the last time.
Nobody has a real name. Nobody has a real name. In fact, it's years later, and I'm still meeting people and finding out what their real names are 30 years later.
Fighting in civilian clothes without military ID is against the Geneva Convention, which meant a Raven would not be protected by the rules of war if he were shot down and captured. The CIA gave many Ravens an alternative.
He said, in case you're ever captured, you might prefer to have a way of stopping everything very quickly. And what he had was a box of cyanide pills, and he wanted to know, do you want your cyanide pill? Well, I always thought a cyanide pill was be a lot littler, you know. No, they're big Hummers. They are really huge, and you'd have to chew on the damn thing in order to get it down. And I reached over to look at it closely. He pulled it back because he was afraid I was going to taste one, I think. Gracefully declined. No, I told him I really didn't think I needed one of those.
The secrecy wasn't intended to deceive the enemy. The communists knew exactly what the Ravens were doing in Laos. But all sides had an interest in pretending to respect Laotian neutrality while using Laos to further other agendas.
Obviously, the North Vietnamese recognized that there were Americans flying these airplanes and Americans advising the ground troops, but it was sort of a wink and a nod. And so this was part of this sort of Alice in Wonderland war that Laos was in so many ways.
The American public was mostly unaware that Laos had become an adjunct to the fighting in Vietnam. Ravens signed a promise to keep even their own families in the dark.
I think this program will be all right. It beats the hell out of Vietnam, where there is no more war.
Cassandra Towsley was in college in the 60s when her family began to receive strange letters from her brother, an Air Force pilot in Vietnam.
He told us little. One of his letters says that it was a secret operation and that it was flying a different kind of aircraft and that it was very important. And that it was the military, but outside of some of the parameters. And that when we wrote him to please not make any reference to the government or the military in any of our letters to him, he would be over there as a civilian.
30 years later, Cassandra is looking for answers about her brother. The only thing she knows with certainty from his letters is that he was a forward air controller, FAC for short. A FAC's job was to fly low and slow in a small plane over enemy territory, seeking out targets that might shoot back at any moment.
So it's sort of, trolling for ground fire, trolling for targets, so you could have something to bomb.
And if you see anybody, keep circling until they either shoot at you or wave at you. And if they shot at you, destroy them. If they don't shoot at you, go look for somebody else.
Once a target was located, the Ravens called in bombers and gave specific instructions on where to drop ordnance.
We were the decision maker. That meant handling a lot of radios, meant talking with a lot of people almost simultaneously, understanding what the fighters can do, understanding what the ground forces need, understanding what the ordnance means. How close can you put it to friendlies? I've got several flights of air stacking up. It got real busy.
Being a FAC was the greatest combat job that exists in the world. You are controlling the battle. You're controlling the flow. You're finding the targets. You're doing everything that comes to war fighting, and you're in charge of it. You were God Almighty. You were in charge. You were the FAC.
The main air base out of which the Ravens flew their FAC missions was Long Chen, a secret city created by the CIA deep in the mountainous jungle. Closed to Westerners since 1973, Long Chen is at the center of the fighting that still occasionally erupts in Laos. And it's exactly where the Ravens are headed. Ever since the Ravens began planning this trip, the place they've most wanted to return to is Long Chen.
Because I think O'Hare Airport is supposedly the busiest in the world. During daylight hours in 1968 and 69, this was the busiest airport in the world.
In the 1960s and early 70s, Long Chen appeared on no maps. It was accessible only by air. Yet this clandestine stronghold was the second largest city in Laos.
It was the center of the American paramilitary operations in Laos. The air war, for all practical purposes, was fought out of Long Chen. You couldn't look any place without seeing an airplane. If you look up, down, sideways, it didn't matter.
Long Chen was built by the CIA as headquarters, airfield, infantry base camp, and refugee center for some 40,000 Hmong displaced by the fighting. For a warrior hungry for action and intrigue, there was no better place on earth to be.
It was every exotic character in the world, the Air America guys, the Continental guys, the CIA case officers, these huge tribes of indigenous people walking around in various costumes. I knew that I had found home, and it was the most exotic place in the world that was going to be my home.
Long Chen was also home to General Vang Pao, the CIA-backed leader of the Hmong.
He was the key to putting together the forces on the ground that the United States would support in order to fight the war.
Vang Pao led his Hmong followers with inspiration and fear.
He was a son of a bitch, but he was our son of a bitch. That's exactly what he was. He was brutal and tough and mean. You won't find many people say that, but that's the God's truth.
Today in the mountains surrounding Long Chen, a few of Vang Pao's Hmong followers are still hanging on, still fighting the communist Pathet Lao. There have been attacks against government installations and tour buses in the area. The Laotian government refers to the attackers only as bandits. Because these attacks are still happening around Long Chen, travel there will be dangerous. The government has declared the area off limits to foreigners. But the Ravens tour guide Susath has promised to take them to Long Chen anyway.
We going to special zone, which is not allowed foreigner to go there. And like as you know a little bit about the difficulties, the safety of the areas, that's why they call special zone. They have a little bit activities of the guerrillas around there.
Susath has told the Ravens in private that he will need to ditch the communist minders in order to get the Ravens and the film crew into Long Chen. That won't be easy. With some uncertainty, the Ravens journey on, this time on the ground, under skies where they once flew and risked their lives on a daily basis.
Everybody in combat has a chance of getting killed. But the forward air controller's job was to go out there and find those places where they were going to shoot at you. A fighter pilot can conduct an airstrike in one pass. He's got a limited time over the target. And our job was to stay over the target.
Staying over the target meant drawing ground fire. The Ravens had the highest casualty rate of any Air Force unit during the Vietnam War. Out of nearly 200 Ravens, 23 never returned from Laos. Many Ravens are still coming to grips with the risks they took.
Sustained combat, over a period of time, wears away things that are unimportant. And the only thing left are the pure emotions that you have. And as a result, when you're happy, you're elated. You're absolutely ecstatic. When you're sad, you cry. You can't stop it. When you're angry, you could kill.
Mike Cavanaugh's journey through Laos brings him face to face with a place and time he's never been able to forget.
I remember this piece of real estate right here. Boy, it gives me chills down my spine. I maxed out the chart on the post-traumatic syndrome. I had all those feelings I was carrying around in my chest because of this secrecy. You couldn't talk about it. You couldn't let it out. This whole thing here has got a vent on top. I remember bringing the fighters in. We got in there, and then all of a sudden, boom. We definitely need some work, you know. We need some psychological tune-up here. Because this is nuts. You know, some of the stuff we did was absolutely nuts. Yellow smoke just belched out of here, and this thing burned for 2 days. We had a healthy disrespect for all authority. We hated everybody. Talk about angry young men. Flume a mile high of black smoke. The thing was full of gasoline, and it took 2 days for it to cook off. When I came home to my wife and kids, I was a stranger. I had been gone for 5 years. Basically, I'd been missing for 5 years in the family. And so I lost the family. Thousands of tons of bombs and thousands of combat sorties, all those lives lost. Coming back here, I have learned that it didn't make any difference.
It is day 5 of the Ravens' expedition to Laos. Tomorrow they expect to arrive in Long Chen, the airbase and home they once shared with the Hmong. But Susoth has called an emergency meeting.
My sir, I have to explain you about the situation of the trip. The situation is changed.
He says there has been another attack with 4 people killed on the road the Ravens will travel. They must now decide whether to push on, despite the apparent risk and despite the government restrictions.
The situation seems like worst. The Lao military cannot get control on it. It's too dangerous and risky that we take the tour there.
Well, that's very unfortunate news.
We're alive this far. I'm not adverse to the danger part of it. And we made it this far.
We all knew there was a certain element of danger coming here. That's no big deal. But the thing is, we're exposing everyone else to satisfy ourselves.
If you really want to take a risk, I'll be there with you. But I think your war is over.
Reluctantly, the Ravens agree to give up their trip to Long Chen and their much-anticipated reunion with their friends there.
The purpose of this trip for me, or what I wanted to get out of this trip, I wanted to meet again with the Hmong. And I wanted to meet back at Long Chen. But they're not going to let us in there because of what's happening, because there's still fighting going on there.
Susoth proposes an alternative expedition to another Hmong village. But this trip may be even more dangerous in a different way. To get to the village, they will travel for 2 days over the mountains near Sam Nua, enemy headquarters during the war. Communist patriotism runs high in this region. Resentment over American bombing still runs deep. On the way, Susoth makes an unscheduled stop.
This temple got built in 1556 and then got destroyed in 1969.
Mike was here. We've hit close to it, which I'm sad to say that maybe we destroyed some ancient artifacts in the heat of the battle. But this breaks my heart to see this like this. The monk has given us a blessing, but we also got a little scolding to go with the blessing. Like, where have you been? It's a little late. We got our butts chewed a little bit.
The monk is angry that for 30 years no one has bothered to come and apologize for the temple's destruction. The U.S. bombing is still an everyday presence in this part of Laos. So much American hardware fell here that recycling it is now a cottage industry. Villagers turn old swords into plowshares, putting U.S. weaponry to peaceful use.
In the fog of war, you don't consider the long-term effect that all this ordnance is going to have. Like us looking back 30-some years later, it looks like they were dropped last week. They're still all cleaned out and everything. So no, we don't think about those consequences in the heat of battle. And it was a day-to-day fight, so it was either us or them.
Traveling deeper into Laos, the Ravens come across a government team removing unexploded ordnance, or UXO. There are more than 500,000 tons of explosives lying around, killing about 120 Laotians every year.
There was more bombs dropped in Laos than was dropped over Nazi Germany during World War II.
You know, all over this country, there's bombs everywhere yet. And there's no doubt in my mind. And there's many that's unexploded. I mean, I can remember putting in what they call delayed fusing bombs, and they were programmed not to go off for maybe 3 days, 72 hours. So there's thousands and thousands of bombs all over this country that's unexploded. There's going to be injuries for a long, long time.
As a child during the war, Susoth was on the receiving end of the Americans' bombs.
The bombing is like 1,000 times that the explosion that we heard today. Shaking like earthquake, 4 or 5 Richters. And through the years, it seems like normal. We used to it. Used to hear the plane coming, and then if we have somebody die. And over there,
The Ravens are not the only ones on this trip with unfinished business.
This memorial is made by the Lao government just to tell the young generation to remember about the Indochina wars. Our solidarity to fight together between Laos and Vietnam will stay forever.
This is my 5th museum from the other side. I know I'm supposed to see a different point of view and see it from the enemy's point of view, but still they were the enemy, and I still have those feelings. And I see them with a hand grenade ready to throw, and I know a lot of my friends were killed at the other end of the throwing of that hand grenade.
The picture over there.
It occurs to the Ravens that the trip is taken on a political point of view.
This price we have to pay, and okay, we did it. We can press on now.
The road north towards Sam Nua takes the Ravens on the edge of an area known as the Plain of Jars. The Jars, thousands of mysterious prehistoric vessels, stand like mute witnesses to the slaughter that occurred here. Some 40,000 people gave their lives on the Plain of Jars, the most contested land in the Laotian War. It was here on the Plain of Jars that Raven Fred Platt flew his final mission, a mission that nearly ended his life.
I ended up crashing upside down, going backwards, and fractured my spine in 7 places. First they told me that I was going to die, and when I didn't die, they told me I was going to be totally paralyzed from the neck down. The worst thing was that they kept telling me the war was over, and I've kept feeling like if I could learn to walk again, then I could come back here and rejoin it and be in the victory parade.
Fred has endured years of physical therapy and a world of pain to walk these few steps. This is Fred Platt's victory parade, crossing the Plain of Jars under his own power.
I never expected to be back here again. I left my youth and my health out here on a PDJ. To come back here, that's a significant thing for me. Feels like I'm closing a circle.
Fred was lucky. 1 out of every 8 Ravens did not return from Laos.
2 military officers went to my parents' home and delivered the news. My mother was at home, and she said she saw them at the door, and she didn't answer the door because she knew why they were there. The official letter says that there was an aircraft accident in, I believe, in a foreign country. We didn't receive any additional information. So I must tell you that I always thought there was another story.
Like many Laotians, some here in the U.S. are still struggling in the aftermath of America's secret war in Laos.
I think it is difficult for people to find out what happened to their relatives because there were no records kept. And if you're lucky, you can find somebody who was there at the time, and you just have to rely on their memory. And that's really all there is.
Cassandra Towsley's brother George died in 1972. Since then, she has been looking for someone who can give her more information and help her find emotional closure. Recently, her search led her to the Ravens.
I'd never heard of this, that there was even a group called the Ravens.
One Raven who knew Cassandra's brother is John Wisniewski.
Cassandra.
John,
Yeah.
please come in.
John was unable to go on the return expedition to Laos. He pulled the harder assignment, talking to Cassandra about the day her brother died.
The information that we received from the Air Force was that he crashed, and there really hasn't been any information besides that.
People just don't know what to say, even though it's been 30 years. And people still have drilled into them that there are security classifications and you still have to respect them. I got a phone call. He says, John? He said, yes. He says, you got to go fly. George is dead. He said, did he get shot down? No, he was doing some practicing, doing touch and go landings. Somewhere in there, he made a mistake and crashed. But he just died. It was just a straight accident.
30 years after her brother volunteered to risk his life in a secret CIA program, it's hard to hear that his death was simply an accident. It's hard to know what to believe.
But why do you think that there's no answers?
Well, that is the answer, you see.
You say that's the answer?
Mm-hmm.
Just a year after George Towsley died, the war was over. The U.S. signed a peace agreement with North Vietnam in 1973, and the Ravens mission was officially terminated.
We didn't win the war in Laos or Vietnam or Cambodia. We didn't even tie. The American public was tired of Vietnam. They were tired of sending kids off and have them come home in body bags. America wouldn't put up with it anymore, and so we went home.
The Vietnam War had become a military and political quagmire for the U.S., with no good end in sight except to pull out. By 1975, the last U.S. personnel were out of Southeast Asia. Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese forces took control. The Hmong soldiers who had sided with the Americans were punished, along with their families, sometimes brutally.
We just packed our bags and left. And to me, that was nothing short of being a traitor.
That was one of the more difficult things emotionally, having to stand down and leave these people who were extended family at that point.
And the Pathet Lao and the communists came over there, wiped them out, and that's what we were there to save them. And we didn't really save them. All we did is cause them many years of misery and inconvenience, or whatever you want to call it. And then most of them got wiped out. That's my regret. My regret is we didn't do our job.
About 250,000 Hmong are said to be living in Laos today. The Ravens are eager to meet with them. Susoth has finally arranged to grant the Ravens' request. The communist minders selected this village for the reunion. A face-to-face meeting between Ravens and Hmong has not happened inside Laos since the war.
Would you tell him how very pleased we are to be sitting with him tonight?
Where were they during the war?
We have to move on the time. Our people have been losing during the war about 50. Mostly bombing and also step on the landmine.
You might tell him we're sorry for his losses.
We come in peace now, and we have many Hmong friends in the United States, and we've kept in contact with ever since we left Laos. We've kept in contact with Hmong people all over the United States.
Have we interrupted the entire village?
All
you need to do is look. I'm all aglow, and you can see it, I think, and I feel it all over my body, you know, and it's so neat to be with them again. It's very, very meaningful. They don't want to talk about the war. They've forgotten about the war, and they just want to go on with their life and to be happy and to have a prosperous village.
But everything is not as it seems. Back in the United States, Laotian translators reviewing the footage told the producers that these villagers are not actually Hmong at all. They belong to a tribe called Khmu, most of whom sided with the communists. But why the deception? The Laotian government has been very reluctant to allow any outsiders to meet with the Hmong, because as many as 10,000 of the Ravens' former allies and their descendants are still fighting, still launching guerrilla attacks. This rare video has never been shown on U.S. television. It was shot by Hmong guerrillas in 2002. They show themselves returning from battle against Laotian government troops. These guerrillas live in the jungle with their families, with no medical supplies, very little food, always on the run. The Laotian army is trying to end the insurrection. The guerrillas say they are being persecuted.
He'd like to address President Bush. He'd like to address President Nixon as well. He says that he's one of the soldiers that were left behind. He says it's because of his work for the CIA that he's being persecuted. He says that if he doesn't receive any help, he's not going to make it for too long.
In the 1970s, the American people wanted the wars in Southeast Asia to end. But how it all ended is still hard for the Ravens to accept.
You volunteer to go over there knowing you're doing the right thing, knowing you're going to win this war because America wins all its wars. And at the end, they pull the plug and send you home. And I'll tell you, that messes with your mind big time, you know. And it took me years and years to get past that, for the most part. And I haven't totally gotten over it, because I think it's a dark and shameful chapter of our history, you know, and I carry that with me all the time.
Some say, however, that the U.S. achieved important strategic goals in Laos, slowing the advance of communism and saving American lives.
What would have happened if we hadn't have gone into Laos strike-wise? There would probably been more than 10,000 more Americans killed in South Vietnam, because we tied up 10 divisions of first-line North Vietnamese soldiers and put them against a bunch of Hmong. Easier to lose your Hmong people than to lose Americans. Doesn't make as bad publicity back home.
All wars leave survivors bearing physical and psychological scars. But the Ravens, told to fight in secret, then told to quit a cause they believed in, they carry their own unique burden. The surviving Ravens gather every year for what they like to call group therapy.
In my memory, I carry the twinkle of your eye, the delight of your laugh, and the courage that was life as we expected every day to die.
John Leonard Carroll. Joseph L. Chestnut.
For the Ravens, the only people who really understand are other Ravens.
Donald Craig Morris. George Henry Towsley.
Together they can come to grips with what they did and grieve for friends who died while fighting one of America's forgotten secret wars.
Until I'm with you again.